the final Deuce is Wild before the runoff election on Tuesday, April the 16th. If you have not made plans to go to the polls on Tuesday, I don't care if you're in Mobile or Washington County, Montgomery, Monroe, Bullock, Pike, Russell, wherever you are at in the 2nd Congressional District, make sure that you are making plans to go to the polls and vote on Tuesday, April the 16th. I'm going to pull up from this AP article some information about turnout on Super Tuesday. And so according to this article, on Super Tuesday, which is March the 5th, 11% of registered Democratic voters came to the polls. 12% of registered Republican voters came to the polls. Y'all, that is pretty abysmal. And the sad fact is that it will probably be significantly less than that comes to the poll on Tuesday, April the 16th. So right now, a very small percentage of voters are really deciding who will go to DC to represent this district, and we need to do better. So again, make your plans to go to the polls, call a friend, call a cousin, call a family member, and let's make sure we have a good turnout on Tuesday. On the Republican side of the race, on March the 5th, Dick Brubaker finished with 37% of the vote. Caroline Dobson finished with 25% of the vote. Dick Brubaker did exceptionally well here in Montgomery County, where I'm at, and on the eastern side of this district. Greg Albritton, who is a sitting Alabama senator, did very well on the western side of the district, including Mobile. In fact, the only county that he lost in the western side of the district is Monroe County, which is the home of Caroline Dobson. The reason that Caroline Dobson edged out Greg Albritton to make it to the runoff is really two reasons. First of all, she spent substantially more money on campaign ads than he did, so her message was able to reach more people. And secondly, if you look at her numbers compared to his, while he did very well in the western part of the district, she had a steady performance across all 13 counties, and ultimately, that's why she was able to edge him out for the runoff. Now, it's been very interesting to watch the runoff between Caroline Dobson and Dick Brubaker. These two have gotten pretty contentious, and most of the focus has been on the issues. And so, a poll came out earlier this week that showed that, at least by this poll, that Caroline Dobson has closed the gap. And so even though there was a 12% gap between their votes, this particular poll is showing that she's now 5 percentage points ahead. So she's closed the gap and added 5 points. And I think the reason she's been able to do that is because her strategy was really honing in on painting herself to the right of Dick Brubaker on the political spectrum. And I think that's resonated with Republican voters. The thing that I've heard her talk about repeatedly on the debate, and also on the clippets and snippets that I've heard of her speaking publicly, is where she stands on issues versus Dick Brubaker. She has really used his past political record as an Alabama House of Representative member and an Alabama senator against him. She's talked about his position on voter ID. She's talked about his position on crime and other bills that came through his desk while he was in the legislature, and she's really used that to paint herself to the right of him. She's also really honed in on her being the most aligned with former President Donald Trump and the idea that Republicans need to send someone to DC who will support Donald Trump. I think that has resonated with voters. Dick Brubaker has been reticent about going negative, and has said he hasn't gone negative, but we're starting to see some glimpses of him, at the very least, defending himself by saying a lot of the things that she has said aren't true. He's painting himself as a longtime Republican supporter, touting financial contributions to Donald Trump and to Katie Britt. And is really leaning in more on his record. And so it will be very interesting to see how voters respond to these messages on Tuesday. I don't have the poll from that was published on Yellowhammer News in front of me, but I believe there's about a 10% margin of undecided voters. So this is a race that can really go either way. Again, a runoff we talk about Deuce is Wild, a runoff is wild, because it really is about who can you get to come back to the polls. You've got 12% turnout on March the 5th. Who of those 12% are going to be your most loyal voters, and who's going to come back to the polls, especially on the Republican side, without there being the opportunity to vote for Donald Trump. So we'll pay close attention to that, and we'll be providing real-time updates on Tuesday. Another thing that is worth mentioning, on the fundraising side, on the Republican side, both of these candidates by far have their campaigns have raised the most money, far more than their Democratic opponents. And I'm not talking about the outside money that has come in from Protect Progress for the Figures campaign. I'm talking about direct funds that have come in through the 4 remaining campaigns. Most of the money that has come in for Brubaker and Dobson has been in the form of personal loans to their campaign. So while Dick Brubaker has taken in about $1.75 million, 1.6 million of that has been money that he has loaned to his campaign. Caroline Dobson has taken in $1.228 million. Of that, nearly 1 million of it is money that she has loaned to her campaign, about $992,000. So one thing that we know for sure is that both of the Republican candidates have independent access to personal funds that they're willing to invest in their campaign. On the Democratic side, we've got Shamari Figures and Anthony Daniels. In the March 5th primary, Shamari Figures came out on top with about 43% of the vote, which is almost double what Anthony Daniels got. And so there is a much bigger gap for Daniels to close in order to be able to compete on Tuesday. If you look at the map, each candidate performed well where their base was. For Daniels, that base is Bullock County and Pike County, the counties that he touted as where his home and his roots are. For Shamari Figures, that's Mobile County, where he got over 60% or at 60% of the vote. That was critical to his success because the 2 largest pockets of votes are in Montgomery and Mobile for the Democratic side of this race. And so with Figures performing very well there and Daniels underperforming there, getting 2% of the vote, that really is the foundation of his success. Now, he was also able to do well in other parts of the district, including Montgomery. And so one of the things that will be critical to Daniels' destiny on Tuesday, if you will, is how well he performs here in Montgomery, where I'm at. I can tell you we've seen a big presence from the Daniels campaign here in Montgomery, but I've also seen a presence from the Figures campaign. So he is not conceding the Montgomery County in any form or fashion. In fact, the poll that came out earlier this week showed that the gap between these 2 candidates had grown even larger, and that the amount of undecided voters is not enough to close that gap. There's several reasons for that. First of all, even though Daniels has raised maybe about $40,000 more than Shamari Figures, Daniels has raised $457,000 to Shamari Figures $415,000. There's the fact that the Figures campaign has been boosted substantially by money through the Protect Progress PAC, which is a pro-cryptocurrency, deregulation of cryptocurrency, motivated political action committee that had, as of the end of February, had put $1.7 million into his campaign. I have seen, I think at least 2, maybe 3 mailers from them, 2 television ads, and I've heard 1 radio ad since March the 5th. And so my guess is that when the next independent expenditure report comes out, that number will grow from 1.7 to probably anywhere from 2.5 million to $3 million. And look, here's one thing that's really clear. We saw this as clear as day in the March 5th election. Whoever spends the most money per vote gets the most votes, period. I will drop my chart in the chat, and you can see what our averages are of how much money each of these candidates spent per vote. Now, I'm gonna say a couple of things here. I could share things about either of these candidates based on my own research and the intel that I've collected over the last few weeks. I'm not going to do that because, frankly, I think that these campaigns have done a good enough job of tearing each other down and using their operatives to do that. So I'm not going to be part of that dialogue, but I will say this, and I'll be in full disclosure, this is nobody's opinion but Terry Reynolds, and you can take it, leave it, fast forward past this to the end, whatever you want to do. I, as a voter in this district, am very disappointed that these campaigns have emphasized residency to the extent that they have in the last 2 weeks of this race. I think that it is, quite frankly, I think that both of the candidates' residency is questionable. There was a huge field of candidates, many of them with closer ties to the district, and the voters of this district chose these two. And I think these are two very highly qualified candidates. But the reality, in my opinion, is that you've got two exceptionally talented, politically inclined individuals who recognized a once in a lifetime, or at the very least a once in the next 10 years opportunity to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing their home state of Alabama, and in a district where they both were born and raised. And they took that opportunity. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't think it's a negative for Democratic voters per se, but it will absolutely, the ads that have come out over the last few weeks in particular on both sides will absolutely be used against these candidates in November. I think it's indicative of the lack of a strong statewide Democratic Party structure in Alabama, that there's not one person or a group of people that would have called these candidates into a room on March the 5th and said, hey, look, here are the rules of engagement for the next 6 weeks. You can do this, you can't do this, because too many people fought for Democrats to at least have a chance to compete. You can't give your opponent the playbook. And so that's my 2 cents on that. Here's the other thing. I think that the experience of these candidates are great to juxtapose against each other. On one hand, you've got Shamari Figures, who has this extensive federal experience. He's worked in the White House. He's served for 2 AGs under the U.S. Department of Justice. He's been legislative counsel for a U.S. senator. Having worked in a congressional office, can tell you legislative counsel, and I've served as legislative counsel for a state association. What that role does is engage in the ABCDFG all the way to Z of writing bills, moving them through the legislative process. And so there's definitely experience there. Working with the AG's office, there's definitely experience. We know in Mobile and Montgomery, there are issues with crime prevention, particularly amongst youth. DOJ has a plethora of grant opportunities that come through for community-based, evidence research-driven violence prevention programs that could really change some lives in Mobile and Montgomery. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. Same thing with the work in the White House and the relationships in the White House. Absolutely, positively relevant experience. Then on this side, you've got Anthony Daniels, who has, first of all, has been a teacher. All right, so he understands the education system. You've got him who's served in the Alabama House for the last 10 years and has driven legislation that has allowed child tax credits. He supported the child tax credit bill that's before the legislature now. Significant role in the creation of Innovate Alabama, which has driven millions of dollars to small businesses, particularly minority-owned businesses. He drove the legislation for 1-year elimination on overtime tax on the state's hourly workers, which has put more money back into citizens' pockets instead of into the Alabama Department of Revenue's pockets. He's been very involved in a lot of statewide Democratic races, and all of that is relevant experience. No doubt these are two very qualified candidates, but nonetheless, I think, look, on both sides, they're spirited, smart, intelligent candidates. It will be very interesting to see how Democrats and how Republicans make their selection on Tuesday, and we'll make sure that we're providing updates here in Deuce Is Wild. One thing I do want to share, after Tuesday, I'm going to go through and I will be deleting all of the posts. The only posts that will stay in the group are posts about the two remaining candidates that come from legitimate news sources. My team and I are working on drafting a new set of rules to govern this room. I think it has served as a microcosm for what I think is really happening on the campaign trail and the conversations that are being had on the campaign trail. But I'm really seeing hints of disinformation and misinformation. A lot of it appears to be coming from operatives who, look, I get it. I've ran a statewide presidential campaign, a congressional campaign, and more local campaigns than I can count. And when you are really in the thick of it, these campaigns are the only thing that matter, and supporting your candidate or opposing the other one becomes paramount. But this space is a space for accurate, credible knowledge and information. So we will be rewriting the rules and being a little more diligent about how we monitor the room. And to that point, if anyone in the group is interested in being a co-moderator of this room, please send me a note. I'm a business owner and I have three small children. And so I cannot monitor this room the way I like, and I anticipate that it will grow and that we'll have more dialogue and discourse. I hope that we do. I would like to have some partners to help make sure we keep it above board, and also ideas about how we can further make this an engaging space. So shoot me a message on Facebook. I appreciate everyone that's taking the time to join this group and to follow these videos and to post and to share your opinions. The Deuce is truly wild. And listen, I hope that I will see you at the polls on Tuesday, April 16th. Until next time.